Hello, all. Welcome to Dragon in Winterfell, a podcast where I discuss works of fantasy and historical fiction. My main focus is Song of Ice and Fire by George R. Martin. But for this one, I'm going to discuss the second of Brandon Sanderson's secret projects. I am currently working on another video for my series on the differences between A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones, which will center on the burning of King's Landing and why Dany will absolutely not do that in the books. But for now, let's head into Secret Project 2. I will be discussing spoilers. So if you haven't read the book and don't want to be spoiled, you will want to back out now and listen to this later. Full disclosure again, I have not read the Stormlight Archive. Of Brandon Sanderson's books, I have read all of the Mistborn books, Warbreaker, Elantris, Arcanum Unbound, the Cytonic books, and now the first two of the Secret Projects. So I can't say I'm an expert on the Cosmere or on Sanderson's works as a whole, so keep that in mind. Thankfully, this particular book is not set in any of his previously established universes, so I don't have to worry about missing connections. Alright, let's get into what this book is about. The official title is The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England. And this book begins with a man waking up in a scorched field wearing a mixed match of modern and medieval clothing and having no idea who he is, nor where he came from. With the help of the scattered pages of the titular handbook, he discovers that he is in an alternate universe of medieval England, and he learns details about himself and his life prior to arriving there, including his name, John West. Unfortunately, John is putting these details together in the wrong context, which in turn leads him to make inaccurate conclusions. But these inaccurate conclusions also force him to rediscover new aspects of himself. As John explores the mystery of who he is, he sets out on the requisite fantasy adventure with new companions he encounters in this universe. This includes Cephalin, a traveling storyteller and magician, as well as Eelstan, a minor lord. The trio set out to rescue Cephalin's brother, who has been taken prisoner by other universe hoppers who have a past with John. Though Frugal Wizard is not my absolute favorite of Sanderson's books, I do think that the character work and the overall storytelling are among the best of his novels that I've read so far. The main reason for that is the solidly structured plot and the realistic characters. In particular, I really enjoyed reading about a character discovering who they are as they progress through the novel. That allowed the book to be deeply character-focused even through the action sequences. The concept of a main protagonist beginning the story with amnesia is not a new one. Sanderson cited Born Identity by Robert Ludlum and Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir as inspirations for this novel. The element of amnesia adds so much to the development of John's character, since he's not just remembering details about himself, but through those discoveries he is recontextualizing who he is, how he reached this point in his life, and who he wants to be. As he describes it, his mind is a white room ready for paint. By the end, he doesn't just rediscover who John West is or was before he entered the alternate universe version of medieval England. He allows himself to leave that version of himself behind and pursues a life as the man he wants to be, essentially repainting a new version of himself. So who exactly is this guy? John West is a man in his 30s who lived in a futuristic Washington state. He struggled through his teens and 20s trying to figure out who he really wanted to be, failing repeatedly at different career paths until he ended up in the gutter. At one point, he wanted to become an artist, only to realize that, though he was capable, he wasn't ever going to be the best. Then he joined the police academy in Seattle, only to wash out of that as well. At his lowest point, he turned to a life of crime. Part of that involved becoming a boxer and gaining physical enhancements that gave him a level of armor and additional strength on certain parts of his body, all of which were paid for by a mob boss. But just as he was excelling in boxing, the mobster who paid for those enhancements demanded that John throw an important match and deactivated the enhancements on his chest and head. Then, this mobster refused to reactivate the enhancements once John had been beaten severely. From there, John served as a door guard and the butt of jokes within the crime lord's organization. But John doesn't know that at the start of the novel. What he learns first is his name. What he thinks he learns second is that he was a cop. This is of course untrue, but what it does is it gives John a positive self-image. He sees himself as a hero rather than a loser and a flunky. Without the baggage of a negative self-perception, he is able to do things he wouldn't have dared if he had had his memories. This is what I mean about the excellent character work. The importance of self-image and how one's perspective of themselves can create their own limitations cannot be understated. While having a positive view of himself doesn't solve all of John's problems, this does allow him to be more proactive and to see that he can do so much more than he thought he could. The positive self-perception also encourages him to help others around him, which he would have been less likely to do if he had had his full memories. So it's very satisfying when we reach the end of the novel with John, and he has all of his memories as well as his experiences in the new dimension, which proved to him that he was more than the serial failure with no future that he once saw himself as. This growth allows him to defeat the man he originally threw the important boxing match for, even without the augments that were turned off. More importantly, he is able to pursue a life with the people he has grown to love in this new dimension. Cephalin undergoes something similar, but to a less degree since she isn't as beaten down by others as John is. As a scop, or a traveling storyteller and magician, she and her brother continuously travel through England, supposedly helping others with magical aid. In return, the people they help feed and house them. The trouble is that Cephalin's magic doesn't work. Even though she was marked from birth as a scop and underwent training, none of the scops' powers work anymore. Cephalin continues putting on a performance of providing spells and other magical assistance, but she knows that she's receiving payment for nothing. She tries to stay faithful to their god Woden, their version of the Norse god Odin, in the hopes that she and her people will regain access to magical protections. She even keeps to his laws of no writing or reading, but after a series of events where Woden continues to ignore her devotion and even assists in the invasion against her people, she begins to preach or boast against Woden and writes runes on doors to protect the city. As a result, she is able to gain the magical aid of wights and the goddess Lagna, who seems to be a gender-bent version of the Norse god Loki. This mirrors John's situation in that Cephalin was bowing and scraping to a magical deity who wanted to limit and restrain her while giving her nothing back, in the same way that John did with the mob boss he worked for. I would argue that John's friend Ryan was similar in holding him down through framing John as inferior. As a supporting character, Cephalin's journey takes place more in the background, but when I was listening to the book for a second time, it was really rewarding to see the progress of her personal character arc, which turned the tide of the story's climax. Alongside the excellent character work in this novel are the complex character dynamics which basically enhance the characters themselves. John's relationships with Ulrich, Ryan, and Eelstan each help to shape his character. Ryan and Ulrich, in particular, aren't that different from each other despite the fact that they're on opposite sides of the law. Ulrich is a mob boss, Ryan is a police officer. The two of them are working against each other throughout the course of the story in an attempt to gain control of this alternate universe. Neither of them seem to care about the people living in this world, seeing them as expendable. As John's childhood friend, Ryan has always been there, subtly putting John down. Like Ulrich, Ryan calls John Johnny. In this way, they're both infantizing him and ignoring that he wants to be called John. This is highlighted to him when Cephalin and Eelstan both respect his wishes by referring to him by the new name he chose for himself, Runian. So with Ryan and Ulrich, they both seem to want to keep John around, but also to push him to the lowest he can be. Ryan seems to get resentful whenever John has any level of success. For instance, John recalls how, when he was doing well in the high school boxing league, Ryan would refer to John's achievement as more dumb than lucky, essentially diminishing John for something he was excelling at. Ulrich, as would be expected of a crime boss, amped this sentiment up to 100 by bringing John's success in the boxing ring to a stop by ordering him to throw an important match and then telling him he was all washed up, despite the fact that he was winning all of his other matches before he was forced to throw that one. So both Ryan and Ulrich verbally tear John down and then act as though he was always beneath them. In doing so, they assist in making that a reality for John, who takes in what he gets from those around him, and that forms his perception of himself. John's relationship with Ilstan works to counter the joint impact of Ryan and Ulrich. He treats John with respect and gives him positive reinforcement. In turn, John is encouraged to do more than he believes he can to match Ilstan's positive view of him, so he is able to grow into a better person. The difference between the way the characters from John's previous world treat him and the way he's treated by Cephalin and Ilstan is directly contrasted, most specifically with Ilstan being shocked that these are supposed to be John's friends. John's dynamic with Cephalin also helps to counter his friend and former employer, but I think the most significant impact their dynamic has is in Cephalin mirroring John himself. Ilstan is more of a positive mentor to John, but Cephalin, in addition to being a romantic interest, is dealing with similar issues of identity and struggles with morality. When they first meet, she identifies him as a criminal pulling a scam. While she's not completely right since she doesn't know that he came from a different universe with highly advanced technology, she's also not wrong. They're both liars. They both trick people as part of making a living, and both want something very different for themselves than the lives that they're currently leading. What's fascinating is that Cephalin's initial judgmental attitude toward John is more about how she feels about herself than about him. She hates that she makes a living on magic she can't wield initially, but has to trick people she respects into believing she can. Once Cephalin and John are able to be vulnerable with each other over their personal struggles, what could be viewed as a romance that happened too quickly actually felt pretty natural to me. Through this combination of quality character and relationship building, I completely bought that they were emotionally bonded, and in combination with their physical attraction to each other, I can believe they're on their way to the romantic love and commitment they have in the epilogue. One of the places where the characters and dynamics weren't as strong was with Jen. Now, I like the way Sanderson set her up as John's lost Lenore, only to subvert the trope by fleshing Jen out with her own interests and her own goals outside of John, and also by having her turn up alive. The twist that she didn't die wasn't particularly shocking. As soon as it was mentioned that he found out about her death over text and there wasn't an actual funeral, I was certain that she would turn up. When Ryan mentioned that he had someone on the inside of Ulrich's organization, it was clearly her, since she was the only prominent character mentioned by name who hadn't appeared on the page yet. All of that was good, in my opinion. The trouble was with how little page content we got of her in comparison to the complex relationship she has with John. Jen literally only has speaking lines in one chapter before completely disappearing again. The brevity of her appearance undermined all the buildup leading to her reveal. Despite this buildup and complexity she was given, it all felt like a hole in the story to have her just info dump and then peace out. In my opinion, Jen should have been revealed around the same time that Ryan appeared in the story. That way, just as Ryan's complicated relationship with John had page space to develop, Jen's would have too. And honestly, what little we got of Jen was fascinating. I'm sure many readers will despise her if they think of her at all, but really look at what we got of her. First, Jen is presented as John's lost Lenore, the woman he loved and lost. Then she's given dimension, with a passion for history and goals of her own. Then we find out John's relationship with Jen was characterized by lots of fighting and making up. Due to his poor self-image, John assumes that he is the only one at fault for this, and that he's not good enough for Jen. And then it's revealed that not only did she not die, but she chose to give up her relationship with him to pursue her dream of going to another dimension and getting an exciting job being an undercover agent. Oh, and she's cheating on him with Ryan, and has been since the beginning of their relationship. So how in the world did the story beats of all that not get fully played out on the page? That's some spicy stuff. I find Jen to be very interesting, and I like the added dimensions this reveal had with John, Ryan, and their dynamic as well. Or I would have liked to see it play out on the page. As it is, I feel like I have to fill in a few gaps, or more than a few gaps. So let's try to fill those gaps in. From the sounds of it, both John and Ryan were in love with Jen, who had feelings for both of them, but was more than willing to put herself and her own goals ahead of them. I would argue that even though she did him wrong, Jen seems to prefer John to Ryan, which solidifies the fact that Ryan has inferiority issues when it comes to John. So why do I think this? Well, Jen chose to be in a public relationship with John and then chose to keep Ryan as her boy on the side. That's significant. So while she's doing John wrong by cheating on him, she's also diminishing her relationship with Ryan by keeping it to the shadows. She's clearly has no intention to commit to him. She just wants to have them both. So for Jen to actually prefer John to Ryan, well, again, that's fascinating, and it shows John's negative image of himself wasn't shared by everyone, despite what Ryan and Ulrich tried to show him, and despite what he decided to internalize for himself. Ryan may treat John as the inferior one, but Ryan seems to have issues of resentment that come out over John continuing to exist. Jen choosing to be in an official relationship with John, while Ryan was essentially her mistress, exemplifies this. He likely can't understand how John continues to move forward with all of his failures, while Ryan has done everything right, but still isn't happy. Having an intelligent and successful woman like Jen hope that her tumultuous relationship with John works out in the long run, while her affair with Ryan himself is meant to only be a dirty little secret, despite him being the respectable one of the two, well, that probably hurts. It's even more interesting when you consider the fact that Jen broke up with John to go undercover, essentially admitting that while she wouldn't give up her relationship with John for Ryan, she would give him up for something she genuinely wanted. And I know that Ryan tried to say that this happened because they needed John's mafia contacts. That's not what Jen says. And John points out that he has no contacts. He's just the door guard. In fact, Jen says there's just something special about John, or Johnny as she calls him. Like I said, Jen seems to like John and even mocks Ryan as too dull. It seems like she wanted them both, but to different degrees and for different reasons, but also prioritized herself over both of them. And again, that is fascinating to me. We need complex female characters. Oh well. So again, regarding John's character, who I really enjoy, something else that's worth noting is that it seems that many in fandom didn't really like John as a character. I wonder if this has to do with the fact that he's very different from most fantasy heroes in that he's in his 30s and is still trying to discover himself in ways that are more typical to teenage characters in fiction. I can see how that might be frustrating to some who are more accustomed to different types of stories, but I would argue that that's very realistic for people in real life. Not everyone gets their lives figured out in the timetable prescribed, which usually includes going to a university, pursuing a field of study, and then gaining a job, and then living the rest of your life in that same field. The starting and dropping of career paths and interests are very similar to situations I've seen in real life, and much of the way John is disparaged for not having his life on track as quickly as society says he should, there are lots of people in real life that I've known who are disparaged for still trying to find themselves in their 20s and 30s and even 40s. People continue to make mistakes. There's no threshold for getting it all right. And I find that, again, fascinating. I like the way these characters are set up to not be perfect, to not have everything going for them. They're still figuring things out, they're still making mistakes, they're still doing bad things in some cases. Very bad things. And again, that's real to life. But overall, I really love the character dynamics in this. And since this is a Sanderson book, it goes without saying that the world building was fantastic. This is obviously where he excels as a writer. I would argue that he kind of struggles with characters, especially if you are reading his books from his earliest to his latest. But the main thing is that he actually is continuing to sharpen his craft, and I love that. In this book, whether people love it or hate it, I would argue is very, very strong as far as characters go. Even though this isn't a Cosmere novel, The Frugal Wizard feels as though it could slip right in as far as the commercialism of magic and the exploration of religion go. That's another thing I like about the world building in Sanderson's novels. The magic isn't just a outside wonder that happens. It's a big part of how the societies are structured. The Mistborn novels really exemplify this, especially in the Second Era, where everything is very commercialized, where the skills of these magical beings aren't just used for fantasy adventure, but for everyday practicalities. It's the same here where Cephalin is essentially a traveling saleswoman who goes around selling her supposed magical abilities in exchange for food and lodging. Another way that the magic is commercialized here is in the ability to travel from one universe to another. Some might argue that that's sci-fi. Well, sci-fi and fantasy are very, very closely linked. A lot of the science fiction can't fully be explained, which in turn makes it fantastical. And I would argue that traveling from one universe to another is indeed fantastical, as are the physical augments that some of the characters have. I would also argue that there's a magic system within this novel that is very, very much a soft magic system. I'm of course referring to the magic of Woden and Logna, the two gods or quote unquote gods within this universe. A running theme within Sanderson's works are how very magical people are considered gods and whole religions are formed around them. A similar situation is happening here with Woden and Logna, who are both considered gods, but they can both die. They don't die in this one, but Woden's wife already died prior to the novel's events, and they could as well. So how do Woden and Logna's powers work? Well, we don't know. It's given that air of mystery and wonder typical to soft magic systems. So it's very interesting to see Sanderson, who is known for his hard magic systems, start to explore softer magic systems. There seem to be rules, but they're not laid out for us in an info dumping scene like with Mistborn or Warbreaker. If anything, the characters are trying to figure out why the magic isn't working before a change in faith makes it work. We also only get little hints of the gods and how their powers work. That is a significant departure from Sanderson's usual style. The softness of the magic system, along with the epilogue, prevents this book from feeling like a genuine standalone. It feels like there's a story that's still left to be told within this universe. I know it's intended to be a standalone, and it does feel more like one than Warbreaker does, but we still get that and the journey continues vibe. But at the end, with Logna, as she pursues research into the universe John left behind, while dropping a few more hints into how the multiverse works. So it's interesting to see Sanderson explore a slightly different type of fantasy than his mainstream series, while still featuring themes he seems interested in, like having magic become commercialized in universe and having exceptionally powerful individuals who have whole religions based around them. So long story short, I really like this book. I may do a Sanderson ranking someday, but just off the top of my head, I would rank this novel somewhere between Warbreaker and the Mistborn series, which are my favorite works, but above Elantris and the Mistborn sequel trilogy. Basically, right alongside Tress, in between most of the books that I've read of his. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. If you read this book, what did you think? Let me know down below. Let me know where you would rank this alongside Sanderson's other novels.